I reported my neighbor for stealing packages, and now she's harassing me. I never thought a simple act of being a responsible citizen would turn into a nightmare, but here we are. It all started innocently enough, packages being stolen off my porch one after another. I kept hoping it was just a fluke, but when it started happening repeatedly, I couldn't ignore it anymore. After seeing my neighbor's suspicious behavior, I decided to report her to the authorities. I thought it was the right thing to do. Who else would? But what happened next? Well, let's just say things escalated in a way I could never have predicted. Now, I'm being harassed, threatened, and my peace is shattered. This is the story of how I became the target of the very person I was trying to protect my property from. It started with small things, nothing that seemed too serious at first, just annoying, really. I had ordered a few things online that I was excited to receive. It was mostly electronics, little gadgets for my house, and some personal items. Nothing expensive, but still stuff I needed. When the first package disappeared, I figured it was just a mistake. Maybe the delivery guy had dropped it off in the wrong place, or I was out when it arrived, so I let it go. But then, it happened again, and again. Over the course of a few weeks, I'd find tracking updates saying that packages had been delivered, but they were nowhere to be found. I started to get frustrated. I double-checked with the delivery companies, and they assured me the packages had been dropped off as expected. But the mystery was only deepening. Something wasn't right. I couldn't just sit back and let it keep happening. That's when I started watching more carefully. Every time I came home from work, I'd scan the street to see if there were any suspicious cars or people lingering around the neighborhood. Nothing concrete, no clear signs of who could be taking my packages. Then, one afternoon, as I was walking back to my house, I noticed something odd. My neighbor, Sharon, who lived 2 doors down, was walking back to her house with what looked like a package in her hands. I thought nothing of it at first. It was an Amazon box, nothing special. But then I looked at it more closely. The name on the package was familiar. I was almost certain it was one of mine. My heart started racing. Could it be? Was she really the one who had been taking my stuff? I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just a mistake, right? She could have received a misdelivered package. I told myself to give her the benefit of the doubt. But as I watched her walk into her house, I felt uneasy. That night, I sat on my porch for a while, just thinking. Something about the situation didn't sit right with me. My mind was racing with all the possibilities. Was Sharon the one behind it all? Could I confront her? What if I was wrong and made a fool of myself? I decided to go inside and sleep on it. I figured it could wait for another day. But when I woke up the next morning, I found myself back on the same thought loop. The packages, her actions, it all pointed to one conclusion. I couldn't just ignore this anymore. It wasn't just about the inconvenience of lost packages. It was a violation. And I wasn't going to let that slide. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just some random mistake or coincidence. My gut was telling me something, and I had to trust it. I'd seen Sharon's face a few times when the packages went missing, and now that I looked at it through the lens of suspicion, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. I spent the next few days paying closer attention to her, discreetly, of course. I watched her coming and going, trying to keep my distance so I didn't raise suspicion. It wasn't long before I saw her outside, carrying another package that definitely wasn't hers. This time, I was certain. It was one of mine. I could tell by the label, and I knew this time I couldn't just let it slide. It wasn't easy to make the call. The idea of getting someone in trouble, someone I had to see almost every day, felt wrong. But the truth was, I was fed up. I couldn't keep losing my packages, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I took a deep breath, sat down, and called the local authorities. The operator was polite and professional, asking me for details about the stolen items and whether I had any evidence. I explained the situation as best as I could, telling her about the deliveries and my suspicions about Sharon. She took the report, and I felt a brief sense of relief. I had done the right thing, right? I couldn't just keep tolerating the thefts. The officer on the phone told me that they would investigate and get back to me if they needed more information. They also suggested that I keep an eye on things and report any new incidents. Over the next few days, I tried to carry on with life as usual. I didn't want to dwell on it too much, but I couldn't help it. Every time I stepped outside, I'd find myself looking over at Sharon's house. Was she watching me? Was she angry? I had no idea what the repercussions would be, but I felt like the ball was rolling and there was no stopping it. And then, just as I thought it might be over, I got a message from a neighbor down the street. It was short and direct. I saw Sharon with a box that looked like yours. I think she took it from your porch. You should check your stuff. My blood ran cold. This was it. There was no turning back now. With the confirmation from my neighbor, I knew there was no turning back. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I had proof. My mind was racing with all the possible outcomes of confronting Sharon. Would she deny it? Would she get angry? Or worse, would she act like she was completely unaware of what was going on? But there was no way around it. I had already made the call to the authorities, and I couldn't sit back now that I had concrete evidence of what she was doing. It was time to act. I decided to visit Sharon in person. I wanted to do this face to face, as calmly as possible. If I was going to confront her, I had to maintain control over the situation. I wasn't looking for an argument, just answers. I didn't know how she would react, but I couldn't let her get away with this anymore. The moment I knocked on her door, I felt my heart in my throat. Sharon answered quickly, a bit too quickly, as though she'd been waiting for me. I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke. "Hey Sharon, do you have a minute? I need to talk to you about something." Her face instantly shifted. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I know about the packages." For a moment, there was complete silence. Her eyes flickered, and I could see the change in her demeanor. She was trying to keep it together, but the tension was obvious. "What do you mean?" she asked, almost too casually. "I've been noticing packages go missing from my porch, and I saw you with one of them," I said, watching her reaction closely. "You're taking my deliveries, Sharon." Her expression faltered for a second, but then she quickly recovered, her face turning defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about. I would never take anything from you." I felt my blood pressure rising. "I saw you with a package, my package. You can't deny it." Her lips tightened, and she stepped back slightly, closing the door halfway as if she were preparing to shut me out. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you've got it all wrong," she said, her tone now cold. "I've been busy. I haven't had time to—" "You don't have to lie to me, Sharon," I interrupted, keeping my voice steady but firm. "I reported it to the authorities. I don't want to escalate this, but I will if I have to." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Sharon didn't say anything. She just stood there, her face unreadable, her eyes darting to the floor. "I think you should leave," she finally muttered. "I'm not discussing this with you anymore." I knew the conversation was over. She wasn't going to admit anything to my face. But I also knew that what I had said would stick with her. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let her off the hook this time. I turned and walked away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the dynamic between us. This wasn't just a neighborly misunderstanding anymore. This was a serious accusation. And no matter how she tried to deny it, she knew the truth. The next few days were eerily quiet. Sharon didn't reach out to me. I didn't hear anything from the authorities either. It was almost like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. I had expected some sort of response from Sharon, maybe an apology or a defensive outburst. But instead, she seemed to retreat into her house, and I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake by confronting her. Then came the first wave of retaliation. One morning, I walked outside to check my mail, only to find a nasty note stuffed in my mailbox. It was written in hurried, scrawled handwriting. "Mind your business. You're a terrible neighbor, and you'll regret this." My heart sank as I read the words over and over. This wasn't just a random annoyance. This was Sharon trying to intimidate me. I didn't know what she thought she'd accomplish with a petty note, but the message was clear. She was angry, and she wasn't going to let me get away with exposing her. I felt a mix of anger and fear. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, to pretend it hadn't happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. If Sharon was willing to write a threatening note, what else would she do to get back at me? I reached out to the authorities again to report the note. The officer I spoke to was sympathetic, but they didn't seem too optimistic about the situation. "It's just a note, but keep it for your records," he advised. "If things escalate, let us know. We might be able to help, but there's not much we can do unless it gets more serious." I felt helpless. What was I supposed to do? I had done the right thing by reporting her, but now I was the one being harassed. It was hard not to feel like I was losing control of the situation. What had started as a simple case of stolen packages had now spiraled into something personal, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. The following days were full of similar incidents, more strange notes, a few random slash-tire incidents in the neighborhood, and even strange packages left at my doorstep. It felt like she was trying to send a message, but I couldn't make sense of it. Was she trying to scare me into backing off, or was she just lashing out in her own way? My anxiety grew as the harassment continued. I started to feel like I couldn't even leave my house without wondering if something else would happen. I didn't want to live in fear, but Sharon's actions were starting to take a toll. I was losing sleep, constantly worried about what she would do next. It wasn't just the packages or the note anymore, it was everything. It was the constant feeling that someone was watching, waiting for me to slip up. It was the idea that somehow Sharon had turned this into something personal, something I couldn't easily escape. The harassment didn't let up. It was like Sharon had decided to make my life a living hell. Every morning, I would wake up to find something new. A strange item on my porch, another threatening note, or sometimes even nothing at all, just an eerie silence. It was clear now, she wasn't just upset anymore. She was retaliating, and she had no intention of stopping. One day, I found a package in my yard, one that I knew wasn't mine. I had already received all my expected deliveries, and this one was addressed to someone else entirely. I didn't recognize the name on the box, but when I opened it, I found it was full of cheap, broken electronics. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake or a joke, but then it hit me. This was Sharon's doing. She had clearly gone to great lengths to get under my skin. I called the police again, and this time, they seemed more concerned. If she's sending you things like this, it could be an attempt at intimidation, the officer explained. Document everything, and if you feel threatened, we may need to escalate the situation. That's when I started thinking about my safety. This wasn't just about the petty theft of packages anymore. It was about personal threats. Sharon had crossed a line, and I knew I needed to be vigilant. I wasn't sure what lengths she would go to, but I couldn't afford to ignore it anymore. As if on cue, the situation worsened. I came home one evening to find my car keyed, deep scratches running across the driver's side. My heart pounded as I inspected the damage. This was it. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Sharon was out of control. The tension that had been building for weeks had reached a breaking point. I knew I had to take action, but I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I called a close friend, someone I trusted, to let them know what had been happening. They were shocked by the escalation. "This isn't just harassment, she's trying to make you miserable," my friend said. "You can't let her get away with it. Have you thought about getting a restraining order?" The idea of a restraining order made me nervous, but it seemed like the only real way to protect myself at this point. I didn't want to escalate things any further, but I couldn't just keep waiting for her to do something worse. I made the decision to go through with it. I knew I had enough evidence, the notes, the packages, the damage to my car, to show that Sharon wasn't just upset. She was actively trying to intimidate me. The paperwork for the restraining order was a process. I had to provide evidence of the harassment, which meant gathering all the evidence I had collected, photos of the packages, the damage to my car, the notes, and my communications with the authorities. It was a lot, but I was determined to take control of the situation. I wasn't going to let her continue terrorizing me. I filed the paperwork, and a few days later, I got a court date. It felt like a small victory, like I was finally doing something to stop her. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the anxiety. What would Sharon do when she found out? How far would she go to get revenge? The day I filed for the restraining order, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I had finally taken the steps to protect myself, but now I was bracing for what would come next. Sharon wouldn't just let this go quietly. I knew she wouldn't, and sure enough, she didn't. The day after I filed, I came home to find a stack of mail shoved into my mailbox, along with another one of those malicious notes from Sharon. This time, however, it wasn't a simple threat. The note was filled with insults, taunts, and accusations. "You think you can just get rid of me with a piece of paper? You'll regret this," it read. It was clear that Sharon was seething with rage, but this time, it felt more calculated, more menacing. I wasn't surprised, but it still rattled me. The note wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. Sharon was making it clear that she wouldn't stop at a restraining order. She was angry, and she wasn't afraid to show it. I showed the note to the authorities, and the officer I spoke with warned me that it could escalate further. "She's testing your boundaries now. It might get worse before it gets better," the officer said. "But you're doing the right thing by documenting everything. Keep all communication, and don't hesitate to call us if anything else happens." At that point, I realized that I had no choice but to be constantly vigilant. This wasn't just about stolen packages anymore. It was about personal safety, and I needed to be prepared for whatever Sharon might throw at me next. A few days later, I got another unsettling call, this time from a neighbor who lived a few houses down. She had seen Sharon parked across the street, staring at my house through her car window. My heart raced as I listened to the details. Sharon hadn't just been sitting in her car. She had been watching me. It was a chilling reminder that she was still lurking, still waiting for her chance to strike. I began to feel like I was living in a constant state of paranoia. Every time I left my house, I would look around, expecting to see Sharon watching me. Every car that slowed down on my street made my pulse quicken. It wasn't just the physical presence of her harassment, it was the psychological toll it was taking on me. Even though I had filed the restraining order, it felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sharon was always one step behind, watching and waiting. The situation with Sharon escalated faster than I had anticipated. A week after the last encounter, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. I froze in my tracks. The air around me felt thick with dread. The door wasn't wide open, but it was enough to set off alarms in my head. My mind raced through all the possibilities, but I knew one thing for sure. Sharon had been inside. I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. Everything seemed normal at first. No signs of an obvious break-in, nothing out of place. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, in the corner of the living room, was a small framed photo of me and my family, which had been on a shelf the day before. It was now turned upside down. It might seem like a small thing, but it was enough to send my heart into overdrive. My personal space had been violated. Sharon had been in my house. Whether she was looking for something to steal or just to mess with me, I didn't know. Either way, I felt sick to my stomach. I immediately called the police. They arrived within the hour and dusted the door for prints, but nothing came up. There was no forced entry, no direct evidence that Sharon had been in my home. But the message was clear. She had crossed a line. She wasn't just harassing me from the outside anymore. She was in my space, making her presence known in ways that couldn't be ignored. I had never felt so exposed. I decided to upgrade my security system immediately. I installed cameras around my house and added motion sensors to the driveway and back door. If Sharon was going to keep pushing, I would be ready. I also went to my lawyer and asked about the next steps for the restraining order, hoping it would provide more concrete protection. But the legal process was slow, and every time I felt like I was making progress, Sharon would do something else to make me feel powerless again. That weekend, I stayed at a friend's house. I needed to get out of my own home, to feel safe for just a little while. My nerves were on edge, and every creak of a floorboard or knock on the door made me jump. I felt trapped in my own life. This wasn't just a neighbor issue anymore. It was becoming an obsession. The real kicker came a few days later. When I returned home, the house was still locked up, but my heart sank when I saw that someone had left a package on my porch. I didn't recognize the sender's name, but I could tell it wasn't one of my usual deliveries. The package was heavy, and I didn't want to open it right away. I wasn't sure if it was another one of Sharon's mind games or something worse. I took a deep breath and carried the package inside, preparing myself for whatever was inside. I opened it cautiously and found nothing but an old, broken mirror wrapped in newspaper. It was a chilling gesture, a symbol of everything Sharon had been trying to do to me, make me question myself, mess with my sense of security. The mirror was cracked, the shards sharp and jagged, just like the situation had become. I called the police again, and this time, they seemed to understand the severity of the situation. The officer who arrived took the mirror into evidence and assured me that this was being taken seriously. Still, there was no way to immediately stop Sharon's behavior. It felt like I was stuck in an endless cycle of retaliation. She was going to continue, and I had no idea where it would end. After the disturbing incident with the broken mirror, I felt like I had reached my breaking point. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was something deeper, something more sinister. Sharon wasn't just angry or upset. She was trying to break me down, mentally and emotionally, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. I went straight to my lawyer. I knew I had to act decisively before things got any worse. Sharon had already violated my personal space, and the harassment wasn't showing any signs of stopping. My lawyer listened to my story, reviewed the police reports, and advised me to pursue legal action more aggressively. "You need to protect yourself," she said. "We can file for an emergency protective order. It won't stop Sharon entirely, but it will add a layer of legal protection." I felt like I had no other choice. The protective order was filed within a few days, and my lawyer assured me that it would help establish a legal boundary between me and Sharon. But part of me still felt like it wasn't enough. What if she ignored the order? What if she found a way to twist things and turn it all against me? In the meantime, my friends and family were rallying behind me. I couldn't be more grateful for their support, but there was still a gnawing feeling of helplessness. Sharon had already proven she was capable of anything, and no amount of legal paperwork seemed to stop her from continuing her vendetta. Then, one morning, I received a call that made my heart drop. It was the police, informing me that Sharon had been seen violating the terms of the protective order. She had been caught on camera approaching my house again, standing just outside the boundary of the order. The footage was clear. Sharon had been lurking near my front door, watching my house. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. She knew exactly what she was doing. I felt a mix of relief and dread. Finally, there was proof, clear evidence that Sharon wasn't backing down, but at the same time, my fear only intensified. What would happen now? Would she be arrested? Would I be forced to deal with even more retaliation? I wasn't sure what the consequences would be, but I knew that my life was far from returning to normal. The police told me that they would be following up with Sharon, and they were considering further charges for violating the protective order. But as they said, it could take time for everything to go through the legal system. I had to remain patient, but the fear of what Sharon might do in the meantime was always present. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. The next few days were a blur of anxious moments. I avoided going out as much as possible, only leaving the house when absolutely necessary. I didn't want to take any chances. I had to be vigilant, and every time I walked outside or checked my security cameras, my mind was racing. What would she do next? How far was she willing to go? After everything had gone down, the silence that followed was almost more unsettling than the harassment itself. For the first time in weeks, I didn't receive any strange packages, no cryptic notes or eerie confrontations. Sharon had been hit with the legal consequences of her actions, and the police had warned her. She was clearly laying low. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was over. I tried to regain some semblance of normality. I spent time with friends, caught up on work, and even started to think about things outside of Sharon's harassment. I didn't want to live in fear anymore, and I didn't want her to control my life any longer. It felt like I was taking back control. My security system was in place, the protective order was holding up, and I was no longer constantly looking over my shoulder. But that peace didn't last long. One morning, about a month after everything had seemed to calm down, I received an unexpected letter. It wasn't from Sharon, it was from a lawyer. My heart sank as I read the letter, which stated that Sharon was filing a counterclaim against me, accusing me of harassment and defamation. It was a complete lie. She was trying to paint herself as the victim and shift the blame onto me for the entire situation. My mind spun. How could she possibly get away with this? I had done nothing but protect myself and my property, and now she was trying to flip the narrative? The anger bubbled up again, hotter than before. I couldn't believe that she was trying to turn the tables and make me out to be the bad guy. I immediately contacted my lawyer, who explained that Sharon's counterclaim was just a tactic, a way to scare me, to force me to drop the protective order and stop pursuing legal action. It was a power move, one that she thought might work because of her ability to manipulate situations. But I wasn't backing down now. I was already in too deep, and the thought of her continuing to target me after everything I had been through was unacceptable. This wasn't just a matter of protecting my property anymore. It was about standing up to her manipulation and not letting her get away with it. The legal battle was going to get even more complicated. I had to fight not just for my safety, but to clear my name. But deep down, I knew that if I didn't stand firm now, Sharon would never stop. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing her that I wouldn't be intimidated. The legal battle dragged on for weeks. I found myself constantly in touch with my lawyer, going over the evidence, trying to figure out how to handle Sharon's counterclaim. She was trying to paint me as the aggressor, and while I knew the truth, the weight of defending myself in court felt overwhelming. I couldn't help but wonder, Was she really going to get away with this? Was my life going to be a constant fight to prove I hadn't done anything wrong? Then came the turning point. One afternoon, my lawyer called me with surprising news. The police had received a tip. Sharon had violated the terms of the restraining order again. This time, there was clear evidence. A neighbor had seen Sharon park near my house, taking pictures of my property and even snapping a photo of my security camera. Not only that, but the police had retrieved more footage from nearby surveillance cameras showing Sharon near my front door once again. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. Sharon had been playing a dangerous game all along, trying to intimidate me by violating the restraining order. Now, there was no denying it. The evidence was irrefutable, and she had crossed a line. No longer could she hide behind her lies. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as my lawyer explained the situation. "This is what we've been waiting for," they said. "With this new evidence, we can counter her claims and reinforce the protective order. The police can also press charges for the violations." I felt an overwhelming sense of relief mixed with a bitter taste in my mouth. Finally, it felt like justice was on my side, but it wasn't over yet. Sharon's manipulative tactics had already caused enough chaos, and I knew there were still going to be battles ahead. But at least now, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The next few weeks were filled with tense legal proceedings. Sharon's counterclaim was dismissed, and the restraining order was solidified even further. The police began to take more serious action, and Sharon was officially warned that if she violated the order again, she would face more severe consequences. It wasn't an instant fix. I wasn't magically free from the stress Sharon had caused, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I had stood up for myself, I had fought back, and I had won. Sharon's hold over me was broken. Reflecting on this entire ordeal, I can't help but think about how far I've come from that first day I reported Sharon for stealing my packages. It felt like a simple decision at the time, just a neighbor acting suspiciously, right? But it turned into something much bigger than I had ever imagined. I had to face my fears, stand up for myself, and even risk losing everything I had worked so hard to protect. But it also taught me something invaluable. Never underestimate the lengths some people will go to, even when you think you're doing the right thing. Sharon showed me that there are always people who will try to manipulate situations, and you have to be prepared to defend your space, your peace, and your sense of security. To anyone out there dealing with a situation like this, my advice is simple. Don't stay silent. Document everything, report any harassment immediately, and don't be afraid to take legal action if necessary. It's a long and hard journey, but standing your ground is the only way to regain control over your life. If you've ever had a similar experience, whether it's with a neighbor, a colleague, or anyone trying to take advantage of you, please share your thoughts in the comments. How did you handle it? What did you learn from the experience? If you found this story relatable or helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Life can be messy, but we all deserve to feel safe and secure in our own homes. Let's keep the conversation going.